I would like to welcome you all to our uh, webinar series on celebrating public space on the occasion of special events. We organize these series in collaboration with City Space Architecture and Eastern Mediterranean University Urban Research and Development Center. Normally, we are two moderators representing two institutions, but the president of City Space Architecture, Luisa Brava, is traveling today, so she's not able to be with us. I am also a member of City Space Architecture and the senior advisor of City Space Architecture, so I will be representing both institutions. I'm honored to do that. My name is Sebnem Hoskara, and I'm the director of Urban Research and Development Center at EMU. And as I said, I'm already a senior advisor. It was only last year we had a collaboration with City Space Architecture and my university, and we are collaborating on various academic events on public space and sustainable development goals. So we have started this series of events for the celebration of public space. And this is our third event, actually. The first one was on the International Women's Day, and the second one was on the Earth Day. And this is the third, and we will be giving a break for the summer, and we will start in October for 3 more events for World Habitat Day, for World Architecture Day, etc. So today we have 3 very valuable guests who have very kindly accepted our invitation to celebrate public space on International Day of Museums, which is celebrated every year on 18th of May. I will not go into details of this special day because our first speaker, Ms. Nuran Mursi, is going to talk about the importance of this day. This year's theme is power of museums. So we believe that the museums have got a special power on public spaces and on achieving sustainable development goals, which with our webinar series, we try to emphasize, and we try to, create awareness, basically. You may say why we are interested in museums. I can say that City Space Architecture has opened its public space museum just 1 year ago, 14th of May 2021. Public Space Museum is a place of transdisciplinary, inclusive, and plural nature, which experiments with methodologies at the intersection of art, architecture, and technologies in order to investigate the complexity of the culture of public space. The Public Space Museum promotes research and training activities, artistic initiatives, moments of dialogues, and residency programs. And it is located in Bologna. And we believe that museums as public institutions, whereas of course their running may not be public altogether, but they have got a great influence on the society, on the education of youth, children, all the community, and partnership with the cities. So therefore, we decided to add International Museum Day on our series, which we try to relate it with public space at the same time. So I would like to briefly introduce our guest speakers today who are with us. Our first speaker is Ms. Nuran Mursi. I need to find. I'm just stuck with all these because I'm the only moderator now. I have to deal with too many things with housekeeping and moderating the session. So excuse me for all the complications if I have any. Let me find the final email. Yes, Nuran Mursi is holding an MSc and a PhD. He is the secretary of ICOM, International Committee for Museums and Collection of Archaeology and History since 2020. She is an ICMA board member between 2019 and 2022, and he's a board member of ICOM, Egypt National Committee. Besides, she is among the professional keynote speakers of these ICOM and ICMA organizations. She worked as an associate professor in Environmental Architecture and Urbanism program, Faculty of Engineering in Ain Shams University, Cairo, Egypt. She also worked as a consultant for museum design and exhibition in the World Design Studio in her university in cooperation with Clemson University in United States of America and Huzgong Agricultural University in China. She holds a doctoral degree in the architectural design of museums and museum studies as well. Our second speaker is from Cyprus, Nursane Karagil. She studied fine arts at the University of Hacettepe in Ankara and has an MA from the University of Brighton. She is currently working as an art lecturer at the Eastern Mediterranean University in Famagusta, Cyprus. Her art focuses on daily life events and the politics of Cyprus with the power of memory, dreams, and surreal fantasies. She collaborates with different NGOs that deal with ecology and human rights to create workshops or curricula for participants to engage with their surroundings. And our last speaker is Jacek Ludwig Skarso. Am I pronouncing your name well?
More or less, it's Jacek.
Jacek.
But all the rest was perfect.
Okay.
No worries, no worries.
He is an internationally exhibited artist, creator, and an academic whose work stretches theatrical experiences across live performance, video, photography, and installation. Born in Rome of Polish, British, and Italian origins, very international, he lives and works in London. His creative process stems from his background in performance and vocal studies. Since graduating from Royal Central School of Speech and Drama. He has got lots of shows and commissions and in different parts of the world. He is actually a reader in art and performance at the School of Art, Architecture and Design in London Metropolitan University, where he has completed his PhD as well. There is a lot to talk about all these brilliant speakers, but I don't want to take too much time. So I would like to leave the first word to Nuran Mursi to give her speech. So the screen is yours. Thank you very much. And just for the participants, we will have chance to ask questions at the end if you have any, or you can write your questions in chat box as well. You are muted still, Nuran.
Sebnem, thank you very much for this great introduction. I'm very happy to be with you today. My name is Nuran Khaled Morsi. I'm from Egypt, the General Secretary of ICOM ICMA and board member in ICOM Egypt National Committee. So let me talk first about the power of museums. As being an architect also, I was in love with museums and the architecture of museums. So I'm very happy to speak today about the International Museum Day for 2022. And I will start my presentation with a small introduction about the International Council of Museums for those who don't know the ICOM. So the International Council of Museum is an international organization of museums and for museums professionals, which is committed to the research, conservation, continuation, and communication to the society of the world's natural and cultural heritage in the present and future. ICOM is a membership association and an governmental organization which establishes professional and ethical standards for museum activities as a form of experts. It makes a recommendation on issues related to cultural heritage, promotes capacity building, and advances knowledge. ICOM is considered as the voice of museum professionals and international stage and raises public cultural awareness through a global network and cooperation programs. What about the International Museum Day for 2022? ICOM has chosen a new theme this year for the International Museum Day, which is the power of museums. Each year since 1977, ICOM has organized International Museum Day, which represents a unique moment for international museum community. The objectives of the International Museums Day is to raise awareness about the facts that museums are an important means of cultural exchange, enriching of cultural and development of mutual understanding, cooperation, and peace among people. So this year, museums have the power to transform the world around us as incomparable place of discovery. They teach us about our past and open our minds to new ideas. Two essential steps in building a better future we are taking to on the International Museum Day, which is taking place today, May 18th. We want to explore the potential of museums to bring about a positive change in their communities through different issues, the power of achieving sustainability. Museums are strategic partners in implementation of the SDGs, or the Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations. As a key actors in their local communities, they contribute to a wide variety of goals, which include fostering short circuit and social economy, and disseminating scientific information on environmental challenges. The power of innovating on digitalization and accessibility. So museums have become an innovative playing ground. So where new technologies can be developed and applied to everyday life. So digital innovation can make museums more accessible, and the people can engage more young professionals and students from school, the university students, and all people. So they are helping all of these to understand complex and unseen concepts. This year, the power of community building. Museums as a community building or a public space. Through education, they are taking through its collection and programs. They can teach the young people how that the past has written our present and coming to our future. So we are upholding dramatic values and providing lifelong learning opportunities to all of people. They are contributing to share an informed and engaged civil society. Museums of the 21st century have a huge potential to influence the world around them and often stand at the beginning of a long chain of social development. The origin of museums is an extensive account of the first great collection in the late 16th century and 17th century. The collection previously was called the Cabinet of Curiosities, related to the place they are saving these collections. But today it has become a huge building that we are seeking to send some cultural messages to all of our audiences. And we are seeking to bring sustainability into museums. So what we are going to do to make our museums more sustainable, how to work museums, how to rethink museums, how to use the power of museums in changing our world into something we can be proud of it and can sustain for a long time. So this year it will be the 26th General Conference for ICOM that will be held in Prague, in Czech Republic in 2022, and the main concept of the conference at all, it will be the power of museums. So let's say what we are going to present in Prague. So let me say something about my community or my family, ICOM ICMA. ICMA being an inclusive of the largest two themes in museums is also one of the oldest international committees in ICOM. ICMA aims to create a network of communication and to organize events such as conferences, seminars, workshops for museums professionals, and to realize publication to diffuse the knowledge about all aspects of museology and museography, of archaeological and historical museums and collection worldwide. So we aim to achieve an active collaboration, a polyphonic communication, and a democratic milieu for sharing experience in history and archaeology museums. And this year we are going to discuss the power of history and archaeology museums without borders, keeping the memory of our history and tradition. Archaeology and history museums and their collections are always a mission to transmit the knowledge of humanity for the future generation since centuries. In this regard, the ICMA annual conference for 2022 is focusing on the power of history and archaeology museums without borders through examining decolonization of delocalization, of ancient collections, provenance of history, historical and current display practices, social encounters, and interfaces. The conference will be covering 3 themes according to the ICOM main themes of bringing sustainable future. For the first one, the sustainable future of archaeology and history. In the digital age, historical museums have found another way to build a new model of communication with its visitors to sustain its existence. Now we don't govern the museums and as an old building, we cannot see anything, just the history. So we are seeking in many museums tend to create a digital channel to break down barriers by making it possible to access to historical and archaeological collection easily. But does these channels will be a continuing trend in parallel with the physical ones? Does it another way to supplement the physical visitors experience or to replace it with a virtual one? Of course, during the COVID, we have seen that most of our museums were closed and we are tending to visit the museums through the internet, and we are seeing virtual reality and virtual museums. So that is going to be the future of museums, or it's going to be in parallel with the physical ones. This debate is pivotal nowadays, and will impact the decision making across the culture industries. In this regard, it's essential to discuss the transformation of museums into a virtual panels, which is believed to be a sustainable way for historical and archaeological museums to continue providing its service to the community in the digital age. The second one is going to be the power and challenges of historical and archaeological museums to connect the communities, how we are going to interact with the local community, how we are going to bring the visitors back into our museums. So historical and archaeological museums are considered the main channel that serves the community and connecting people with their history and cultural heritage. Following that concept, it's important to discuss the social and educational role of such museums in enriching communities' well-being. What do historical and archaeological museums do for the national and international communities? How they get the communication and the communities involved in the museum practice? So it's very important to discuss something like this. You can see that the picture, it's Jacques Chirac Museum in Paris, how they are sitting on the ground and bringing the small child and their families, how they are interacting with them and discussing many things. So how such children go to the museum and being in love with such collections. The third one is going to be the dispersed ancient and modern African collection and the global community. We are going to discuss something different this time, how we can rethink the African collections that are transferred from its original to another museum around the world. So the African collection reveals an extraordinary cultural impact and considered as the source of knowledge. In Africa, you can find the cradle of life. So over the decades, thousands of African collections have been taken out of their homeland and displayed in museums around the world, as they are considered as the source of knowledge. But now the African states want their collection back. So we are going to discuss the African collection during the period of slavery, empire, and colonialism, that they were taken from its original land and from its natural context and displayed outside of their context. Then we are going to discuss the government, how they are working to bring them back into their lands. So it's essential now, because as we are going to rethink about the social role of museums and how it should be sustainable, how to work for the community. So you have to make your people happy, how to get them attached to their history. So you want to bring the originals into your land and tell them this is your history and you have to be proud of it. And then you have to pass it to the new generation and learn your children that you have a great history. At the same time, we are going to discuss also the historical and archaeological exhibition, the process of engaging visitors within the collection and display. Visitors are, of course, adding a new content to their existing knowledge through visiting their museum. With the spread of digital access to museum collection and documentation has added further dimension to the democratization of meaning making. Nations' history is thus selected, constructed, and transmitted by museum, and then in the process of being experienced by visitors, it's transformed into a kind of understanding of the past and an independent historical sense. ICOM ICMA this time is seeking to explore the way in which historical and archaeological museums are communicating the stories about the origin of the nations through its exhibition, in addition to examining how historical and archaeological museums construct and reinvent nations' history over time, creating an informative narrative in relation with the narratives of different countries, different nations. We are seeking to see many nations and different histories that they are displayed in different ways. So at this time, we are going to discuss many things that it's related to the main focus of the whole community of museums, the whole world now, that it's sustainability and how you are connecting your institute to the social life of people. So this time, the International Museums Day is working on the power of museums in bringing society back to their museums and back to their history. This was the end of my presentation and the end of my talk today. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Nurhan Mursi. We will be getting the questions and discussions at the end, if you don't mind. So I would like to jump to our second speaker, Ms. Nurtanya Karagil, to give her speech.
Everything is okay?
Yes, we see your screen and we hear you.
Okay. Thank you, Nurhan. My perspective is going to be totally different, and I'm sure that you will understand why this is happening in the middle of the presentation. But I want to start from the Famagusta, which is where our university is and where my hometown is. So after studying abroad, I turned back to Cyprus and I'm actively working in the cityscape, let's say. So this photo is from one of the events that happens in a public spaces, which is a Venetian palace. And it was coming from a residency program that happens in Piccadilly, which was a rooftop theater that they are dealing with the theater. And EMA is like an art organization in Cyprus and their collaborative residency in Famagusta. And as a space, we used Piccadilly, which was an open space and got funded from European Union as a social entrepreneurship award. And it was an old button shop. So the space itself kind of a everyday life museum for us, because it was a really crowded space in 80s, 90s when people were creating and sewing and like getting material for their craft. They were using this shop. So we opened the space again as an idea of creative space that artists and researchers and like academics can actually come together and make and create, not craft this time, but much more kind of a real life happenings on arts, let's say. Is it happen? At the end, it was kind of a community space and I was become a cleaning lady, but that's another story. So in Piccadilly, we engage with the communities. We had the breakfast sessions, like traditional craft and stuff. But after that, we were actually doing art residencies and getting artists together. So like I said, this is a Venetian palace from Famagusta. And it's a work of 23 that he's a street artist. And he was actually mesmerized when he entered the Famagusta and see this ancient city, which all the centuries and all the Lusitanians, Benedicts, Ottomans, British marks on the city. So it's kind of captures your soul, the heritage itself. But in a daily life, this is actually a parking lot. So you don't see art every day in Famagusta for sure. How our community uses space is a parking lot. For a few years, they are giving permission for events and making concerts, but privately. Like you should actually, that's also a bit problematic because you pay to enter this space in a way. So we don't like that. And this was the other side, and it's more about like two artists' work, like Bucha and like Alitza, and they were more about like making a communication and dialogue with the viewer and asking questions, or like make them believe that there is a future in Famagusta, because Famagusta is a really sad place as a thing. I don't know if everybody aware of what is the Cyprus problem is, but hello, we are divided. It's not the news anymore. So there's a lot of post-colonial trauma, lots of occupation, different powers games and mafia and casino. So everyday life is a bit stuck in a communication level. We don't have that kind of active communication on our squares and like public spaces. So you kind of need a little bit push to engage with people. Another exhibition that happens in Piccadilly was Settling Within Life. And again, it was getting the power from the everyday life and putting artworks in everyday life places and playing around with it. And it was another artist residency. It can look like that our life is good and art is happening everywhere. And when you have people and space and a bit of funding, I think you can really activate your city in a way that's how you want to be living, kind of inside of the city. But what happened is Piccadilly closed after 2 years because it was a family owner's belonging shop. And apparently for her, what we are doing and how we want to live our life was kind of not how we're supposed to live our life, because she was coming in a really militarist background, and she was kind of a supporter of the army in a wartime, and she couldn't understand why we are getting in a dialogue with the people from the other side. So she kind of kept the building and didn't want us to use anymore. And Piccadilly without that history and the heritage, I think it's not only about the space sometimes, it's just you kind of need that creative connection between what you are doing in the future and what happened there at the past. So in that kind of a sense, we lose the Piccadilly. And it's kind of a oops, but this happens in North Cyprus a lot, and generally in all the Mediterranean countries. I'm sure that Egypt is not that kind of bright as well, especially what we are thinking what happened in the past, near past. So I want to check like near past. Dun, dun, dun. It's scary. So our past, like when I write the museums in the Google, because of this talk, all the images that I saw was kind of a flag and a big hetero males cutting a red ribbons. And this is actually from a contemporary modern art museum of Cyprus opening. So as you see, it is all gold framed, red carpet. And actually, I know the inside story. Apparently, the owner of the museum didn't like the frames of the artist gave to him. It was all different. And he changed the frames accordingly to be the same. So this is kind of the understanding of the making a museum, which is happening recently, like a few years ago. In this moment, I will again remember the topic, like what we are talking about, the power of museums. So if the museum is not coming from the community ground and it's coming from the money based, or like telling another story to you to believe that kind of where you came from, the power of museum can be really go wrong, and it can actually create a generation that does not attach with the space itself and detach from the environment, natural habitat. And it's kind of being a powerful in a mind of militaristic way, which is contain a lot of hierarchy and not so equally balanced power, let's say. So another thing is to understand the dominancy, I think, in what is happening. For example, in Famagusta 4 years ago, they wanted to give this chimney house as a museum to become a city museum, which our university has actually worked a lot on this topic. And like recently, we still suddenly they said that, okay, this is not going to be a museum anymore. We decided to give one guy to make a taverna to meze house or something. So there's still some people to get activated and make protest about it, but this does not happen only one time in your life. Like this happening for 40 years or 10 years, and sometimes you kind of lose your power to believing that you can fix something in that kind of a stuff politically in a rule of the government, let's say, because all your power is kind of a drain during the process. But if you kind of find your way around these things, and like rather than looking to the exact points, looking around them, through them, and find like these little breathing gaps, actually don't have any museum or like any gallery space opens up a lot of much more opportunities that connects with your surrounding in a future level. For example, if your museums are full of nationalist news and like flags or like barbaric stories, you don't end up to go to a museum anymore. So you don't get that kind of a wrong power on your body, and you create like how life you can be, like how you want to live your life and what kind of a thing that you can enjoy. And most of the people who are the creators gather around and like did this 3 exhibition, which is a one-night stand only, and it was using a normal habitat of someone's home. So when you enter and visit as an exhibition space, it could be someone's living room or somebody's toilet, can be the video screening. So if we are talking about the sustainability right now in the museums, I think this much makes solutions for every small city, let's say, like opening this kind of random places as a museum and like gather around the people and make this free talks. So it was kind of a powerful starting, and it's kind of shake the north a bit in a way that you don't need to expect something from the big power, which has a less power for your life. So you can actually be this active citizen and engage your community and work around things and create your surroundings through it. Of course, this opens just a small bit, but there's also people with the NGOs that are working in Cyprus. And one of the great festivals I think that is happening in the public space, which is a really weird public space, is in the buffer zone. It's like in a green line of Cyprus. It's the Buffer Fringe Performing Art Festival. It's happening in the UN buffer zone. And in 2019, not aesthetic choice, but I don't know if you see it as the army tents. So these are UN tents that performers are used as a salon of like a museum or gallery space. And in this conference, I was also having a talk. And in this kind of stuff, like you can actually not hide what you are thinking of. And because the space it gives you that kind of a power, you kind of also find your inner power to become much more transparent about what your political view is on how you want to live in Cyprus and stuff like that. And another happening was Emergence. We are in south again, this time, south of Nicosia. And Yannis Tomazis, which is also a creator of a NIMAG, Nicosia Municipal Art Gallery, that works really well with the children program, educational program, library, and new modern exhibitions. What they're good about as well is like they always contain every multicultural aspect of Cyprus and works with a different background. So it's not only a one-note exhibitions, it's always like they're using English, Turkish, Greek as a communication method. So when you enter, you don't feel like a foreigner in your home city, and you engage with the artworks much more easily because Cyprus also have that language problem. So one of this conference, Yannis was talking about idea of a museum and how the militaristic museums are affecting our life and how a museum should be. And we were making residency programs with youth and discussing about what museum should be and how it is, and engaging cities together and making residencies. And his idea was this Famagusta new museum. It is not an actual building, it is the city itself. And it's based on this sentence: I understand and forgive the past, I love and generate the future. And this is kind of a life motto for Cyprus, let's say, if you want to survive in a good behavior mindset. And it suggests looking to a Varosha. I don't know, again, if you heard about in the news, but we had this closed occupied area from Turkey after the 74 war. They just didn't leave and stayed there, and the people who abandoned their houses just for a week, they were thinking, couldn't enter their houses for 47 years after. And one of the political election game, Erdogan decided to open partly Varosha to be a support of what he chose as a leader in North Cyprus, and gave that him as a power. And they're actually suggesting this place openly, that it's a dark tourism area, and it works like a museum. Like you enter, you travel, you rent a bike, you can eat ice cream, but the houses around you is looted, and it's kind of a real happening war crime, let's say. So this photo is from the opening party photo, because in the first day they entered with the big trucks, which was, this area is architecturally is really powerful. It's like modernism of Cyprus. And when you enter it in the first way, you can smell this really heavy asphalt new road smell. So you walk in this new sticky road, but all your surroundings is kind of happens as a theater background, because they change your way of walking in this kind of a space and cut all the nature and clean the roads and stuff. You walk in a normal pace, like that you're visiting another city, but what your surround is actually something totally opposite. So this is a Municipal Garden, and how they retouch their heritage, like they're erasing the signs, putting flags, because it's really popular in North Cyprus, putting flags. It's kind of when you do that, you kind of forget everything about Aphrodite, and you suddenly become this proud Turk person. So the flags are really everywhere, and it's kind of, I see them as an erasing button for your memory, like a Men in Black movie. Like you kind of forget who you are and what your heritage is and what was your actual agricultural, like what you are doing as a Cypriot. So Famagusta Museum suggests that whole city as a museum, like an open museum, and we don't need a building to enter to get activated and learn and like celebrate who we are and understanding the past or generate the future. So it just suggests that being a normal, active, citizenship participatory actions and interactive activist interactions can actually change the community and create this memory that museum does. So museum is there as a key point because it takes its actions as a museum, but as a space, we're thinking something much more empty, like without any walls, like it's just the city itself. And in the Buffer Fringe Festival that I was mentioning about, that happens in a buffer zone, we also did a partly in Famagusta, Varosha area. And this is from the 70s. It was like, interestingly, which I didn't know this, I just learned this 2 years ago, Famagusta was a capital of oranges. So it was like an orange festival all over the place, and it was like these tons of oranges using as a decoration. So think about like how much oranges they were having, so they can actually decorate the whole city with oranges. And this is that sculpture from today. And as an action, we did this orange souvenirs and like created the first actual gift shop of this Famagusta new museum. So this souvenirs created by the another community space as a workshop in an everyday life. So everybody was kind of talking about, is there any oranges, or like, do you remember, or what happened to the oranges, and how the oranges are like suddenly not here anymore. And you kind of try to understand what happened in the city before just from a fruit. As a performance, we just put the 2 oranges in a municipal garden and like walking around. And even that it looks like so simple, this place is still occupied. Like it has a Turkey military inside with drones. Police are checking your bags, and they understand you easily that you are not one of them. If you are not making Instagram photos and don't act like a tourist and get sad a bit when you see this space, they know that you are not one of them. So they kind of observe you more and ask more about questions, what you are doing. So putting these oranges in a pool was kind of making that space free, like it was like a opening. Another thing that we did was actually putting a sound installation in Varosha. And Yannis is from Russia, so he became a refugee when he was 14 years old. So he has these young, vivid memories, and because he's kind of from an art scene, he can be this objective citizen. Actually, in this point, I want you to write a number in a chat between 1 to 16. So if anybody is much more, I will open that number as a sound at the end of this talk. So please write from 1 to 16. In Varosha, when you enter, it's like okay to take photos, not okay to have drones and stuff like that, but you can listen anything. And we did this GPS triggered sound mapping. So you see 16 different spots. And when you enter and walking around the buildings, you see and hear Yannis' stories from his childhood memories. So it's kind of erased that mindset of where am I and what is happening, and is this a dark tourism? And it's kind of connect you with your surroundings and buildings and the past much more easily in a free way. And because it's your headphones, you can actually create that inner peace around you, and you can be much more peaceful when you visit Varosha. Because what was happening in the community, most of the people didn't want to enter Varosha because how it opens really in a tragic political way. So I can say that like lots of Cypriot didn't approve this and didn't want to visit Varosha, even that they were curious about it, because the half of the city is closed. So you see that half closed city all your life, and suddenly one little door is open. So you're really curious about what is the back, how this back of the building is look like actually. So this application gives lots of opportunity for everybody to engage with the real stories and understand what is happening around it. And in an art sense, I think in Cyprus, we don't need to rediscover everything through art. Sometimes like living your everyday life as a normal person can be a performative art, because there's a lot of occupation, lots of intervention, lots of manipulation. So you kind of forget what is your real essence is. So the art could be a tool to remind you that, and kind of over that trauma and open you in a free zone. And that was the end of the Municipal Garden tour. It was like we did this big circle, talk like what is happening. There was like Varosians, like old owners with us, so they tell in their aspect how they feel. There's refugee families, they shared their memories, or they were the ones that who came for the first time. So they could actually share with us like how they happy that they kind of visit this space with this kind of opportunity rather than the under the title of the dark tourism. So I want to say that I think museums not only become like these places in visited areas, but it could be also the idea that people share together. And I think the dialogue and like the communication, like how we do it today, actually, like how Sebnem called me about this thing, and now I'm talking about this with you, this can actually make the ideas bigger and like make it powerful again. So thank you. And that was it from me. I will check your number and listen you one little thing. Is there any number we have?
Yes, we have a couple of numbers.
Which is the most one?
Finally, it is 12. We have 113, 312s, and 110.
Okay, I'm opening 12. I don't know what is it, so we will see it together.
Okay, that's fun.
Another favorite spot of Demokratias Avenue, Pablos Kiriago bookstores, a huge bookshop. I remember coming here, walking up the beautiful stairs that existed in the middle of the bookshop. Here we bought all our English books. It was an international bookshop. It had the latest books for Cyprus, but also for foreigners and for tourists living in Famagusta. Behind me, next to the Lykion Ellinidon, was the Apollo open air cinema. There was also a winter Apollo cinema, but here it was the open air cinema. Famagusta had many open air cinemas. I remember Rio, planted with jasmine trees all around. Again, that smell of jasmine when we were watching these amazing films in the open air. And then opposite Pablos Kiriago, Esperia Tower Hotel, a big hotel apartments block. But the most important thing about it was the Perroquet nightclub. Actually, Perroquet was a very famous nightclub of Famagusta. And the owner commissioned Christoforos Sava, the famous artist, Cypriot artist. Unfortunately, he died at a very young age in 1968. He represented Cyprus also with 5 other artists at the Venice Biennial, the first Cypriot participation at the Venice Biennial. He was...
Yeah, kind of an example for you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nurtane. I think having heard about museums or the idea of museum from this organizational perspective, and then your talk, which is a museum in a non-museum context, and how we relate art, activism, and public space, real or unreal, they're all making us think about the future of public space, the future of museums, the power of museums or non-power of museums at the same time. So it was an interesting merge. So without losing time, I will leave the screen to our third speakers to give his talk.
Thank you, Sebnem. So let me just check that it's playing correctly. Can you all see it? Brilliant.
Yes,
Okay,
yes.
so hi everyone. Really interesting. Thank you for just really exciting to hear these ideas. And I think this concept of the museum, not just as a physical space, but also as a critical lens, I think is very poignant. And although obviously the reality that I'm going to be talking about is obviously is very different, but but I think, you know, a lot of it is a shared sort of idea that we need to think the museum differently. And so in my take, I'd like to suggest for this particular presentation, this idea that we might also want to think of the museum theatrically. So I'm Jacek Luisa, I'm Reader in Art and Performance at London Metropolitan University, where I'm the Deputy Director of a research centre called Creature, which stands for Creative Arts, Cultures and Engagement, and through which we'd love, by the way, to do more collaborations also with the, to follow up this conversation. And but I also lead a new master's called the Masters in Public Art and Performance, which started in 2020, and now it's in its second year. What I'm going to talk about very briefly, you can also find it in a journal article that's open access, and it's in the International Journal of the Inclusive Museum. And it's based on two projects of mine. This one that you see here called In Limbo, and then another project called The Pecking Order. And I'm just going to show you at some point a really short extract just to give you a flavor for the work. But this is not just about my own work, I'm just using it as a case study, but really it's about obviously much broader ideas. They happen to be based at Tate Modern, but of course this can apply to any museum, and particularly an art museum. So I often start with this provocation. So is a free entry art museum automatically a public space? Is the art that it contains automatically public art? And of course, you can see in the tone of this question that I probably would suggest that we should think of it very critically, because something can be free access and is still not being really public, a public space, to the extent that if I feel intimidated by that space, well, then it really isn't public for me. And so I think we you know, so one of the things that I like to do as one of the approaches through which we can do this is by kind of switching on the publicness of a museum by making sort of playful engagements through a theatrical lens that comes from my own background. In particular, so these two projects, In Limbo and The Pecking Order, were live performance and virtual reality installations that I created in association with Tate Exchange and in collaboration with London Metropolitan, with Anise Gallery, AVR and AVR London, which are two virtual reality studios that we used. One of the things I wanted to talk about very briefly is this idea of Tate Exchange. And unfortunately, as I speak right now, Tate Exchange is actually closed. It's no longer an entity, and it's a real shame, because actually that was exactly what I know I thought would really work in institutions that are very you know, institutional, such as the Tate, and actually really did disrupt some of that institutionalization. So my work centers in an effort to extend the experience of theatricality beyond the theatre space, and increasingly in the form of multidisciplinary works created for exhibition spaces spanning performance, installation, video and VR, often in collaboration, as is the case here, with partnering artists and organizations. And Tate Exchange, so Tate Exchange is basically used to be a strand of between Tate Modern and Tate Britain, and has been an important vehicle to test this approach, providing both a physical and conceptual platform to initiate experiments of a participatory nature, reimagining the floor designated to its program in the Blavatnik building, which is basically the new strand of Tate Modern, as well as intervening in other spaces within the Tate Modern. But very simply, Tate Exchange was an initiative within Tate that was about really creating kind of democratic collaborative projects with lots of different partners, trying to challenge the typical hierarchy of a museum space where the collection is the sacred bit, and then everything else, the outreach, the education, everything else, it becomes secondary in that traditional way of looking in the museum. So Today's Change was intended to really break this hierarchy. Significantly, it's no longer there. And so whilst this was because of COVID and other funding issues, it is significant that that particular effort was brought to a halt. And I hope that this will, that a new initiative that of similar nature will come back. So both of these projects, and I'm just going to give you a little sample video from one of them, the second ones, but they were both essentially participatory projects, interactive projects where the public would be invited into a specific floor at Tate Modern to create, to be part of this participatory experience. And but equally the performance from that floor where we were based would then spill into across the museum. And it was essentially what it would do is for a week it would kind of you'd see within limbo, which is about the idea of this sort of kind of limbo state in which you are greeted by bureaucratic angels. You see these figures across the museum, and very similarly the second project which uses a similar sort of logic and talks about the idea of the sort of the way in which we are constantly observed by society, in our own movements, in our own behavior, was also reprised in the second project called The Pecking Order, and so which really was about sort of the politics of spatial dynamics and the idea of being observed. And again, you have these sort of fictional characters that then spill out across the Tate Modern, and the performance is also then accompanied by a VR experience. I'm just going to show you this short video from that just gives you a flavor again of this work. Hopefully you should let me know if you can't hear the sound, and I'll just play half of this video, so it'll be about 2 minutes.
Expect something a little eerie, but quite whimsical at the same time. I'd say something quite different as far as like installation art goes.
This exchange of the power dynamic that you were watched, but now you are the one watching, you are the bird. Power comes very much from how you present yourself to other people. It's how you interact with people and what you make of it, what you use it for.
It's about that tension between us knowing that we're being observed, whilst at the same time understanding how we position in relation to others. So this project is about surveillance and power relationships. These, of course, are very important subjects, but for me, it doesn't mean that they need to be necessarily treated in a non-humorous or non-playful way. So we approach the subject by inviting the audience into an absurd scenario. They are inside what we call an observation nest, and they are engaged in simple tasks to do with spacing yourself in a location. So, for instance, if you imagine you are on the tube, where would you sit? Or if you imagine you are at a meeting, where would you sit around that table? And whilst performing these tasks, they are constantly reminded to ignore the birds watching them. And this idea of having these characters, these humanoid birds in suits that are there constantly inspecting the audience and reminding the audience of this paradox of ignoring their presence is, of course, the point of this installation.
You go downstairs and then there's like a number of kids running after you, trying to like grab your beak and making mocking crow sounds. Like that is something that you cannot, that I did not expect. There's a lot of things that you cannot anticipate. You just have to trust your impulse and perform.
I particularly enjoy it when I see children or family audiences engage with the humanoid birds around the Tate Modern. And I love the fact that this can provide an imaginative experience, so that there are different levels of entry to this installation. And I think that's, for me, what art should do, so that a specialist spectator, as much as the broader notion of the public in mind, can both enjoy the same project for different reasons.
People are really curious as to what is going on, and it's been amazing to see the students bring people up through the building as well. This sort of Pied Piper trail of people following those students up into the space.
In art, you are limited by the physical set and by the resources you can use. Meanwhile, in VR, you can create any word you want. So when it comes to art practice, I think it's great connection between the two, especially for this exhibition. Jacek created a physical part. He has people dressed as birds, they're walking around, you go into the physical set. But then in VR, we were able to take it much further, because person wears the headset and they are the bird. You can fly around, you can see things, you can experience things which in reality you wouldn't have access to.
There are many components to this. It's not just the installation here on this floor, Tate Exchange, it's also the performance of the birds that go through the Tate Modern spaces. But of course, there is more to that. There is also the virtual reality component and the talks. And the talks are completely inherent to the way that the piece works, because through the talks, we advance the aspects that we are trying to represent artistically. And within those talks, I love the fact of having different guests from different disciplines who themselves bring other elements. So we've had choreography, opera, impromptu performances, and all that creates a truly multidimensional experience for the public.
Working with a
Okay, and so I'm
Tate
oops,
Exchange
hold on. I need to.
has been
There we are. Okay, so this is just to give you a flavor for these works. And so to sum up, they combine live performance, immersive sound, virtual reality, interactive tasks for the audience, and also open talks. And it's about playful interactions, but also what I like to refer to as a layered experience with multiple levels of access, of entry for audience engagement, so that you can have the sort of specialist talk as much as you have also the components that have a different and perhaps more accessible kind of entry in mind. And so this idea for me, it kind of revolves around theatricality, but as I use this term, I'm also very, very painfully aware of the connotations of theatricality, which haven't always been very positive. So for instance, let me just, sorry, I just need to move the screens on my laptop. So from Plato to modern art criticism, the term theatricality has been used, often seen with suspicion, artificiality, exaggeration, lack of substance, and of course Debord's idea of the society, of the spectacle. The term theatricality as a conceptual reference point is one that originates largely, so I think one of the issues here is why the word theatrical is often seen with suspicion is because the word itself comes from outside of the theatre, and as such it inherits an understanding of theatre that is at best partial and at worst distorted. In a museum context, the word theatricality may kind of suggest merge with other ideas such as edutainment or the scope of the experience economy, terms that are both, yes, in a sense, there's nothing wrong with them, but equally, as I'm sure we're all familiar with, they also bring some kind of dubious, connotations as well. Should the museum basically just become more and more like a sort of Disneyland of culture, And so my kind of kind of question is, how do you separate that sort of consumer-driven ideas of experience and spectacle from a notion of the museum space as theatrically engaging, where such a phrase is intended to denote a deeper, innovative understanding of what a museum can do and how it can activate its publicness? So for me, it's not just a case of let's entertain the public so that they will come to the museum, but let's actually heighten what the museum can do through that element of theatricality. So in doing that, the shared elements, I think I mentioned these already. So in fact, I'm going to kind of go a little bit faster in this part. So I did say already the different aspects to these projects. Again, the participatory action, the roundtable events, the spilled performances, but most importantly, both projects share an understanding of theatricality as a tension between the staging of the piece and the awareness of the museum context. The latter is not only a backdrop, but an essential semiotic frame for the experience. This is key to what is proposed here in my work as a theatricality that is critical as opposed to merely spectacular. So just to clarify, what I'm advocating in my own work as one of the approaches that one can use is not simply saying spectacular theatricality, let's just keep them entertained, but rather that theatricality becomes a critical lens that can be used by the museum to reinforce what it can do. And so in that sense, critical theatricality is more than a spectacle. It's self-reflexive. It's a form of self-reflexive theatricality that's playfully conscious of the museum context that frames it. This is a massive quote, and I'm going to read it, and I'm nearly there, but I'm going to read it very quickly. And this is taken from this article that I was writing. So, diversifying our understanding of theatricality in the museum space is vital in order not to fall into reductive considerations of this term. Accordingly, within a museum context, we should ask the question of whether theatricality is used to distract us from the seriousness of the surrounding environment, perhaps to make such surrounding more palatable on a commercial level, or whether it is employed as a vehicle to engage not only with the piece under consideration, but also with the museum as a whole. Understanding the latter aim, which is here associated with the concept of critical theatricality, would help us distinguish this process from a mere generalized notion of theatricality as spectacle. So the term critical is used here because this process combines the playfulness of the artistic choices proposed with a degree of intellectual distancing and self-reflexivity. Crucially, it is based on a dialogical dimension with the viewers, who contribute their responses as part of the artwork. As participants, they're both transported into the imaginary world of the action and reminded of the real world framing this. Even inside the sets of In Limbo and the Pecking Order, the two examples I mentioned, the museum is still visible. And to use Valerie Casey's words, beautiful article that I've got their reference at the end, linking this to Baudrillard's reality principle, the performance, so these projects, the performance, the theatricality, conceals the fact that the museum proper is the unreal, the stage, while quietly exposing the reality that the museum's sacred aesthetic mission is also a social construction. So it's kind of, we use theatricality as a lens to think of the different forms in which we construct knowledge. And these are just some reference that I'm just putting here. Maybe I can share after the slides. But thank you very much for this. There's always so little time to speak on so many big topics, but hopefully it's another layer to our discussion today. Thank you.
Wow. Yes, it surely did add another discussion to the overall idea of public space and museums. Now, I was taking my notes how to wrap up things like the power of art, the power of creativity, the power of museums, the power of space, theatricality, the power of technology, and the power of people, basically, and the power of artists. So the list can really continue. I would like to thank you all for your very, brain-opening presentation. So I would like to open up the discussion or the questions if from any of the audience, or if you have to each other. How do you feel about each other's presentations? I think this is also curious. For example, Nura, how do you feel about the different type of experiences of two artists from two different parts of the world, two different parts with different contextual, political, social backgrounds, and the museology idea. How would you wrap that up?
I think the first one was Nortain. It's really great that you have an interaction between the people and the art, how they are tasting this art and interacting in a very positive way. If you have to see Jack's experience in the Tat Museum, I'm really impressed with the people who are wearing the bird's head, and it's really very good that you get the people were looking what they are doing with these heads, and you were looking around in the whole space. So they got their eye, and they were following them along the museum. So you get an interaction between people and the space by letting them go around with these people with bird heads, and they were moving around, and the people were tracing them along the museum. So it's really a great experience, and very unique also. And the term itself, the theocritical, it's very very unique, and I like it very much. I have to make a search about this.
And there's also what's striking. Thank you, Nuran, very much. And what Nurten was saying before as well about the there's something very interesting as a thread, because obviously we're talking about obviously completely different situations, perspectives. But actually, one thing that is really interesting is that there's a thread of the ephemeral in the museum. So that, for instance, you know, a museum is not just a collection of objects, but it's the relationship between it's a social relation somehow. And whether you do that within a particular institution, such as, or within a set of institutions like you know, or buildings like Nuran you mentioned, or even for instance, something like Tate Modern, or as Nurten, you were saying about actually the city becomes the museum, because actually it's not about just the static object, but in fact the social relation that you create is far more important than I like to think, than the object itself, than you know, an object in a sort of not that that's not important, but that relation becomes really where the exchange is. And of course, what a fantastic example, Nurten, of that sort of resilience and political kind of dimension of these actions. I think, you know, it's really to be admired and really inspiring.
I think all what you are saying reminds me of that the phrase that Icon page has got, like, museums have no borders, but they have a network.
Yes.
So seriously, in both cases, in Nurtane's and your case, we can feel that really museums have no borders. We can, whereas museums have got a space, virtual or physical or mindful, you know, we may have our own museums. The example that Nurtane showed us, that at the corner of a private house, you can set up your, yes, or the public space museum that City Space Architecture has recently established. When you hear about it, what is a public space museum? You know, is it a museum or is it a public space? So it is a combination of two concepts, two big concepts, two creative concepts, bringing it together. And really we can, you know, this is all in our minds, basically, and all our creativity and all our standing point with our political views, with our you know, social views, where we stand in the world or on the earth. It's all about it, I think.
Definitely. I'd be just thrilling to start a collaboration, by the way. I think it'd be just brilliant. So I hope that these conversations can also lead to more exchanges.
More exchange, to more, you know, especially with, unfortunately, as Nurtane said, we in Cyprus, we don't have proper museums. Like all the museums are, I find them very old-fashioned, even if they are, some of them are recently opened. They're not like museums. On the other hand, we have artists or activists or artivists who are working in NGOs or personally, privately, bi-communally with colleagues in the southern part of the island, you know, doing things out of context or within context. So all these experiences, I think, are worth merging with more, you know, more creative, more institutional experiences where we can enrich mindfully or socially or creatively. So we should think about these. Of course, it is a matter of people, space, and funding. But before that, with simple touches, we can do more. This is what I believe. And this is probably the case of how we contribute to a more sustainable world, by all means, physical, environmental, economical, political, whatever you say. This is the feeling I've got. It's very exciting.
Definitely. And I just wanted to really also say that sometimes, you know, when I talk about, you know, the places like Tate Modern, you know, often one gets the impression that there's, you know, oh, that looks like quite ideal. There's a situation because obviously it's Tate Modern, you know, there's certain sort of, you know, but actually I think, you know, it's really important to raise this point that I think, you know, there is no museum around the world is without its politics, bureaucracy, ideology, things that you'd want to change, things that are problematic, lack of support, and of course in different measures, in different situations, of course. But I think, and therefore I completely agree with you, Sebnem, that we absolutely have to learn from each other, because actually going back to what Nurtane was saying and what Nuran was also saying, and you know, there's, you know, different realities bring completely new sort of learning points. And often, like in Nurtane's presentation, you know, when actually faced with particular political challenges, often that's where the best ideas come out, because you've got something to fight against. So I think I'm all you know, I think we absolutely need to learn from each other. And I think, you know, like a place like Tate Modern would have a lot to learn in that sense. Yeah, brilliant.
One more thing I would like to add is in our you know, urban design or architecture fields, we have all these not recent but very intellectual and very effective concepts of placemaking or do-it-yourself architecture, do-it-yourself urbanism, tactical urbanism. All these, you know, ideas can be very much integrated with art, basically, with artists, with creativity, and with museums as well, because museums are like, they can become places where they can extend to their open spaces, you know, public spaces at the entrance, for example, and they can become educational spaces, of exterior educational spaces for kids, for youth, for the whole community. There is also this idea that the public libraries are even, or museums may become public libraries, learning environments as well. They are already, but how to combine, how to look at these from an interdisciplinary or multidisciplinary or transdisciplinary perspective is what we are trying to do, actually. You know, I think this is the richness of today's society, thanks to technology. I don't want to say thanks to COVID, but with all these online possibilities that we are having, you know, from Egypt, from Cyprus, from Rome, or from London, we come together, we discuss things, and then we continue. But this is a richness, and I think we should use the advantages of this richness for future generations.
Definitely.
Okay. I think our time is somehow over. I don't want to take more time of you as well and the participants. I would like to thank you very much to be part of this event.
Thank you.
To share your experiences with us. The event is already recorded and we will be sharing it on our websites pretty soon. So you can reach and you can maybe share it with your students, with your community, etc. So I will stop recording now and say goodbye to you all.